Chapter 10 of Bunyip Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Bunyip Land by George Manville Fenn. Chapter 10. How We Saw Strange Things. "You rascal!" I exclaimed. "How dare you? Here, doctor, what is to be done? How am I to punish him?" "Send him back," said the doctor, "or no, we'll leave him here at the village." Jimmy leaped up from where he had been squirming, as Jack Penny called it, on the ground, and began to bound about, brandishing his waddy, and killing nothing with blows on the head. "No, no!" he shouted. "No send Jimmy back. Mass Joe leave Jimmy. Jimmy kill all a black fellow dead." "Now look here, sir," I said, seizing him by the ear and bringing him to his knees, proceedings which, big strong fellow as he was, he submitted to with the greatest of humility. "I'm not going to have you spoil our journey by any of your wild pranks. If ever you touch one of the people again, back you go to the station to eat damper and mutton and mind sheep." "Jimmy no go back mind sheep. Set 'gin mind sheep. Jimmy go long Mass Joe." "Then behave yourself," I cried, letting him rise, and he jumped to his feet with the satisfaction of a forgiven child. In fact, it always seemed to me that the black fellows of Australia, when they had grown up, were about as old in brains as an English boy of 9 or 10. That morning we had made our start after days of preparation, and the chiefs of the village with a party of warriors came to see us part of the way, those who stayed behind with the women and children joining in a kind of yell to show their sorrow at our departure. The chief had offered half a dozen of his people for guides, and we might have had 50, but 6 seemed plenty for our purpose, since, as the doctor said, we must work by diplomacy and not by force. So this bright morning we had started in high spirits and full of excitement, and the great band of glistening skinned blacks had parted from us, and our journey seemed now to have fairly begun, as we plunged directly into the forest, the 6 men with us acting as bearers. We had not gone far before our difficulties began, through the behaviour of Jimmy, who, on the strength of his knowledge of English, his connection with the white men, and above all the possession of clothes, which for comfort's sake he had once more confined to a pair of old trousers whose legs were cut off at mid-thigh, had begun to display his conceit and superiority, in his own estimation, over the black bearers by strutting along beside them, frowning and poking at them with his spear. At last he went so far as to strike one fine tall fellow over the shoulders, with the result that the New Guinea man threw down his load, the others followed suit, and all made rapid preparations for a fight. Humble as he was with me, I must do Jimmy the credit of saying that he did not turn tail, but threw himself into an attitude as if about to hurl his spear, and blood would undoubtedly have been shed had I not taken it upon myself to interfere, to the great satisfaction of our bearers. Order then was restored, the loads were resumed, and Jimmy, who did not seem in the least degree abashed by being degraded before the men he had ill-treated, strutted on, and the journey was continued, everyone on the look-out for dangerous beast or savage man. The doctor and I carried revolvers and double-barrelled guns, one barrel being charged with ball. Jack Penny was delighted by being similarly furnished, and in addition he asked for an axe, which he carried stuck in his belt. We were each provided with a similar weapon, ready to hand at times to the blacks, who were always ready to set down their burdens and make short work of the wild vines and growth that often impeded our path. We had determined, I say we, for from the moment of starting the doctor had begun to treat me as his equal in every sense, and consulted me on every step we took, all of which was very pleasant and flattering to me, but I often felt as if I would rather be dependent upon him. We had then determined to strike into the country until we reached the banks of a great river whose course we meant to follow, right up to the sources in the mountains. There were good reasons for this, as a moment's thought will show. To begin with, we were in a land of no roads, and most of our journey would be through dense forest, whereas there was likely to be a certain amount of open country about the river banks. Then we were always sure of a supply of water. Game is always most abundant, both birds and beasts, near a river, and of course there is always a chance of getting fish. Fruit might also be found, and what was more, the villages of the natives not upon the coast were nearly always upon the rivers. Of course, on the other hand, there were plenty of dangers to be risked by following a river's course. Fever, noxious beast and insect, inimical natives, and the like. But if we had paused to think of the dangers, we might very well have shrunk from our task, so we put thoughts of that kind behind us and journeyed on. At first, after getting through a dense patch of forest, we came upon open plains, and a part of the country that looked like a park, and as I trudged on with fresh objects of interest springing up at every turn, I found myself wondering whether my poor father had passed this way, and as I grew weary I began to take the most desponding views of the venture, and to think that, after all, perhaps he was dead. That we were in a part not much troubled by human beings we soon found by the tameness of the birds and the number of deer that dashed frightened away from time to time, hardly giving us a glimpse of their dappled skins before they were lost in the jungly growth. The walking had grown more difficult as the day wore on, and at last the great trees began to give place to vegetation of a different kind. Instead of timber we were walking amongst palm-like growths and plants with enormous succulent leaves. Great climbers twined and twisted one with another unless they found some tree up which they seemed to force their way to reach the open sunshine, forming a splendid shelter from the ardent rays when we wished to rest. There was no attempt during the morning to make use of our guns, for at first we moved watchfully, always on the lookout for enemies, seeing danger in every moving leaf and starting at every rustling dash made by some frightened animal that crossed our path. By degrees, though, we grew more confident, but still kept up our watchfulness, halting at midday beside a little clear stream in a spot so lovely that it struck me as being a shame that no one had a home there to revel in its beauties. The water ran bubbling along amongst mossy rocks and overhung by gigantic ferns. There were patches of the greenest grass, and close by, offering us shade, was a clump of large trees, whose branches strewed brightly coloured flowers to the earth. A flock of gorgeously plumaged birds were noisily chattering and shrieking in the branches, and though they fled on our first coming, they came back directly and began climbing and swinging about so near that I could see that they were a small kind of parrot full of strange antics and apparently playing at searching for their food. "We'll have 2 hours' rest here," said the doctor. "A good meal and perhaps a nap, and our feet bathed in the cool water, and the rest of the day's journey will come easier." "But hadn't we better get on?" I said anxiously. "Slow and sure must be our motto, Joe," said the doctor. "We have hundreds of miles to tramp, so we must not begin by knocking ourselves up. Patience, my boy, patience, and we shall win." As soon as he saw that we were going to stop for rest and refreshment, Jimmy began to rub the centre of his person and make a rush for the native basket that contained our food, from which he had to be driven, for though generally quite unlike many of his fellow countrymen, Jimmy was scrupulously honest, he could not be trusted near food. There was no stopping to lay the cloth and arrange knives and forks. We each drew our heavy knife and filled the cup of our little canteen from the stream before setting to at a large cold bird that we had brought with us, one shot by the doctor the day before, and cooked ready for the expedition. I cannot give you its name, only tell you that it was as big as a turkey and had a beautiful crest of purple and green. We had brought plenty of damper too, a preparation of flour that I dare say I need not stop to describe, as everyone now must know that in Australia it takes the place of ordinary bread. The native carriers were well provided for, and my